All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Virtual Friday's Dire Literary Series, and we have a special, unique evening with two fabulous, fantastic, well, uh, well awarded uh, features tonight, and it's Josh Barkan and Jennifer Haigh. And first, we'll start with Josh, and what I love about this is I don't have to do all that much. So there's Josh. And did I not share the screen? There we go. Okay. So instead of me blowing the intros, all I've got to do is this. And so for you folks reading at home, here's Josh's bio and a little highlights here. And his awards, his first published work is the novella Before Hiroshima. That was re-released in 2011. He won a National Endowment for the Arts, and he had a literature fellowship for the book, selected an Amazon Top 100 Kindle pick 3 times in February. His next book, the novel Blind Spot, was published by Northwestern University Press and was a finalist at the 2009 Patterson Fiction Prize. The novel came out of his experience living in Boston, where he taught writing at Harvard and Boston University. His writings appeared in Esquire, contributed to the Boston Book Review, Glimmer Train, awarded 3 of his stories their fiction opens. He's won the Lightship International Short Story Prize. His last collection, Mexico, awarded the runner-up for the Juniper Prize for Fiction. He was the runner-up for the Grace Paley Prize for Short Fiction, and was named a Best Book of 2017 by the New York Times. And if you're interested in anything else, it's joshbarkan.com. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh.
Thanks, Tim. I'm in Mexico City right now. I'm in the center, the very center of the city. So I thought I would read a little bit of my story, The Kidnapping, from the collection of stories, Mexico. And it literally takes place right in this neighborhood. The Kidnapping. 10 seconds before they kidnapped me, son of a bitch, I was walking my dog, Azteca. There are little stalls all over my neighborhood in downtown Mexico City. They sell everything: paper, plastic beach balls, bolts of cloth, straw hats, tight jeans with sequins, bright plastic Tupperware, blow-up superheroes, chilies, tacos, fried pigskin, speakers for local bands, tools, and wedding cakes. You name it, it's being sold down here in the center of town. I like to watch the hot woman walking around my neighborhood. I like to even check out the tranny prostitutes. Not that I'd ever want to sleep with one of them, but man, they do it up all the way. You know what I mean? They go whole hog. So I was walking my dog late at night. Another dog was barking ferociously from a rooftop. I don't usually go the way I was walking after 10 p.m. because walking down that way gets a little hairy. During the day, it's fine, but at night, you got to be careful. Normally, no one messes with me because of the dog. I have a Cholo Escuintle, which is some kind of pure race dog from the time of the Aztecs. It's one of only 3 kinds of 100% pure, authentic Mexican dogs. People come up to tell me all the time to try to get close to the dog. They're a little afraid, but they're cautious. And they're especially curious because I'm an American and they know something ain't right with a white-looking guy, a güero, with one of these pure Mexican dogs. So it gets their head spinning. And they come up and ask me what my dog's name is, and I say Azteca. And that gets them laughing, because it's almost like calling your dog George Washington or something unduly serious and patriotic like that. And since my dog's big, they keep their distance, and they like that my dog is big. But man, those motherfuckers, when I was walking late at night at 11 p.m., trying just to get to my studio where I do some of my bigger paintings or more conceptual type of work that takes up some larger space, those dudes just came up to my dog and shot him point blank, one shot right through the rib cage. And Azteca twisted his ears first toward them even before they got the shot off, but he didn't have a chance. It was cruel to do that shot. Azteca got blown down. He cried while his rib cage was jerked around, and then my dog, which had always guarded me so well, was kaput. I was standing on one of those empty streets downtown in the center of the old colonial city where there's always garbage littered around in the middle of the night after all the people coming and going have bought and sold whatever they're going to take home for the day from the stalls. So I was standing naked in that street, other than my dog, The harsh mercury of some streetlights in the distance, the only thing making the street safe. Usually there's at least someone on the street watching, hanging out, talking with their buddies. But these dudes who did the kidnapping, they knew what they were doing. They must have been watching for just the right moment. There was no one, and I mean no one on the street when I finally saw them coming and when they shot my dog. One shot. I looked up the alleyway. A car comes screeching up from the shadows. These two dudes who smell like a combination of too much piss, alcohol, and bad perfume push me into the car. One of them puts a gun to my head. He tells me to shut up in really fast, crude Spanish. He tells me to bend over. They put a blindfold on me. They tie my hands behind my back with the leash from Azteca. Azteca was gone, of course. They left him back on the street, stone cold dead. I tried to tell myself to stay calm. I told myself just to do whatever they wanted me to, because I usually have this attitude that if you stay calm, everything will work out. But it wasn't doing me any good. This one jerk, and I mean that with the greatest of all understatements, he spit in my hair. He told me I was a filthy pig and that my mother would never see me again unless I begged for mercy. Beg, he said, beg now, beg for your life. So man, I begged. Oh yeah, I begged. I tried to do it calmly. I tried to do it with all the sincerity I could muster. I'm going to beg until they get whatever they feel comfortable with, I thought. One of them hit me on the back of the head, and when I came to, I had a large welt on my scalp. I'll tell you what's terrifying. It's not being alone in the place where they take you after they kidnap you. It's the fact that you're not alone, that there are other people with you who you know are going through the same hell they're putting you through. Here's what they did every day for 5 straight days. They woke me up in the middle of the night. They slapped me on the side of the head. They did all this after I listened to them cut the finger off some young woman in the other room. And then they took me in the back of the car to an ATM where they forced me to take out all the money I could, the daily limit, before they slapped me on the head again, beat me in the chest, and stuffed me back in the car. You're like a gerbil on a spinning wheel while they do this. You're in the 9th ring of hell. I mean, you don't know what day it is, whether it's the same day as the day before, whether they're just gonna fucking waste you right there, whether they've already found a way to get in touch with your family, and whether your family is gonna pay. It's just one big black hole of no information. Maybe you'll live, maybe you'll die. And that finger they cut off the woman in the next room, that's real. That's her begging for them not to do it. That's them coming in a posse of 3, and you hear them scuffling with her, and you hear them shouting at her in Spanish. They aren't paying, señorita. They aren't holding up their end of the bargain, so they're gonna have to be convinced. The cry from that woman, there was no faking there. They take a pair of kitchen shears, they run it up along the skin, they scrape your knuckles with the edge of the blade of the scissors until they bleed. I know how they do it, because later they took one of my fingers off and sent it to my family. This is what they do. They tease you. They make you shit your pants. They have you saying, please no, please don't do it. Please no, for Christ's sake, I'm a painter. I'll do anything. I'll get you more money. I'll get you any money you want.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was great. And second up will be Jennifer Haigh. We're going to get back to you later, Josh, for some great questions too. Second up is Jennifer, and there's Josh's book, by the way, for you folks. Jennifer Haigh is a novelist and short story writer. Her novel Heat and Light won a literature award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. It was named the best book of 2016 by the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and NPR. Her previous books include Faith, The Condition, Baker's Towers, and Mrs. Kimball, winner of the Pan Hemingway Award for debut fiction, and the short story collection News from Heaven, winner of the Massachusetts Book Award and the Penn New England Award in fiction. And for more about Jennifer, you can visit jennifer-haigh.com. And I'm looking forward to hearing you, and I've got to find you on the screen, which would be helpful. You know, we're not super well rehearsed here. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, Jennifer Haigh.
Thank you, Tim. I'm going to read from Heat and Light, my last novel. The days begin at 7. Beds are made, showers taken, breakfast eaten. It is arguably the most useful part of the program, the dumb animal normality of living in daytime, sleeping at night. For years, Darren has kept junkies hours, nodding off at 9 a.m., at midday, at dusk. After breakfast, meds are given. Men file in and out of the nurse's office, where the magic jello shooters are dispensed. In light of his last spectacular failure, Darren is not invited to the party. He is given a multivitamin and a cup of herbal tea that smells like socks. He takes a small, sad pride in his bed making. The tea is made from milk thistle, an ambitious herb that is going to detoxify his liver, or at least try. Fortified with sock tea, he attends his morning group, which is called steps. This is to distinguish it from the afternoon group, which is called group. At steps, 20 guys work the program. They admit they are powerless over drugs, that their lives have become unmanageable, that a power greater than themselves can restore them to sanity. They turn their lives over to the care of said. You might find this hard to do if you've ever considered yourself powerful. If you're Darren Devlin, as regrettably he is, this is not a problem. The first 3 steps are easy enough. Step 4 is the searching and fearless moral inventory, which is where the trouble begins. This time around, Darren has a head start. His last time in rehab, 2 short, long years ago, he made it all the way to step 8. We made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them. Willingness was not the problem. He was willing enough. The problem was the list itself, which included every person he had interacted with since the age of 14. The list contained multitudes. The day after he completed his searching and fearless moral inventory, he walked out the front door, caught the 12 bus at the bottom of the hill, rode 16 blocks, and wandered the neighborhood until he ran into Nelson. Faced with such a list, an unending litany of shames and failures, anyone would want to get high. Nelson was his best friend, an old junkie. How old exactly and whether Nelson was his first or last name, Darren never knew. With a few notable interruptions, hospitals, prison, Nelson had been fixing since the 70s, the golden age of Baltimore heroin. When the supply dried up in the 80s, he'd actually gone to live in Afghanistan, where his colossal habit could be maintained for pocket change. Before the terrorists and American soldiers had ruined everything, Kabul had been the junkie's Mecca, his Medina, his Lourdes. Someday, when the bullets stopped flying, Nelson and Darren would travel there together. Afghanistan was Darren's exit strategy, his plan for the future. High, he'd been impressed by his own foresight. There was power in having a plan. The names on his earlier list carry forward like a bad debt. His senior year in high school, the Bakerton Rotary Club had awarded Darren a small grant called the Hope Scholarship. Placed in the context of a massive tuition bill from Johns Hopkins, it was more than nothing, but only a little more. The Rotarians were big on ceremony. They presented the award at a special banquet. Darren was called to the stage and handed a giant replica of his $1,000 check printed on poster board. The Hope Scholarship existed because of his father. Years earlier, when Darren was still in junior high, Dick Devlin had sold his fellow Rotarians on the idea of funding a scholarship in the sciences. I was thinking ahead, he admitted to Darren later. I thought I might come in handy for you someday. For years, his father had been laying groundwork so that Darren could receive the Hope Scholarship. It is, well, sobering to think. Arnold Wu had been his first lab partner in organic chemistry, a shy, serious kid from Southern California who shattered all Darren's assumptions about that place. Their first experiment involved recrystallization. They'd written the report together on an all-nighter filled with Red Bull and 2 Adderalls Darren had bought from a guy in his dorm. The second week's experiment involved melting points. Darren had been late for class, but Arnold had started without him. He'd given Darren his notes to copy, the calculations written in mechanical pencil in Arnold's careful hand. The third week's experiment, Darren can't remember. Whether he'd gone to class high or had only gone in his imagination was impossible to say. OChem was a weed-out class. By second semester, the class had shrunk by a third. Thanks entirely to Arnold Wu, Darren was not weeded out. His second lab partner in organic chemistry was Holly Gilman, and this was much, much worse because Holly had loved him. She was not a pretty girl, for what that mattered. Like his high school girlfriend, she had chosen him for her own inscrutable reasons. At the end of freshman year, he was invited back to the Rotarians' banquet to give a speech on his experience at Johns Hopkins. Darren promised to attend. He had every intention of going. He'd even borrowed Holly's car. His academic advisor at that time was a woman named Greta Schenkel. That summer, she paid him generously to house sit and watch her cat while she visited her parents in Stuttgart. For an entire month, he enjoyed the professor's stereo and projecting TV, usually with total strangers, people who'd given him or sold him dope or promised to. One night, he returned to Greta Schenkel's and found a smashed window. He never got around to reporting the robbery. That night, that entire summer, he was in no shape to deal with cops. When he crashed Holly's car, he called her in a panic. There were no witnesses to the accident. He convinced her to tell the police that she, not Darren, had been driving. He slept with her because it made her easier to deal with. He still owes Holly Gilman several $1,000s, more possibly. He has no idea, he's never asked, what she pays for car insurance. He's not entirely sure when the professor's cat ran away. The stories are numberless. The schedule sets aside 2 hours for phone calls. From 11 to noon is phone out. From 5 to 6 p.m. is phone in. Twice a day, Darren stations himself at an actual payphone, the kind that used to exist in the world and now is found only in rehab, where cell phones, with their treasure troves of stored numbers, the suppliers on speed dial, are not allowed. He starts small. All things considered, he doesn't feel too bad about Arnold Wu, who had requested and was assigned another lab partner. Arnold, at least, had the stones to save himself. Now a postdoc at MIT, he doesn't at first, and possibly not even later, remember who Darren is. "Oh, Darren," he says finally, in a parody of remembering. "How are you, man?" As though the words "I'm in heroin rehab" don't answer that question. "No sweat," he says when Darren explains his reason for calling. "Actually, it's kind of funny. My lab partner after you remember Wendy?" Darren thinks, did Wendy sell smack? Nope. Sorry, don't remember. "Yeah, we're married now, with a baby on the way, so I guess I should be thanking you." "You're welcome," Darren thinks as he hangs up. "I'm so glad my addiction has worked out for you." Greta Schenkel no longer teaches at Johns Hopkins. Possibly she went back to Germany, says the indifferent graduate student who answers the phone. Gia Bernardi's cell phone number is stored in his own cell phone, which had been confiscated at intake. From some remote part of his brain undestroyed by opiates, he conjures forth her parents' phone number when he'd phoned her every day for an entire summer, a lifetime ago. Her father is winded, a little wheezy. He sounds very old. "Hang on," he rasps. "I'll go get her." "Hello?" says Gia. "Hello?" Darren remembers clearly the first time they got high. Without him, she would never have picked up a joint. Of this, he is utterly sure. He hangs up the phone. The first time he calls Holly Gilman, she hangs up on him. The second time, she weeps. The third time, she hangs up again. None of this is the actual problem. The actual problem is that he can't call his mom. The next day, he tries again. This time, Gia herself answers. His contrition seems to amuse her. "Sorry for what? We had a fucking blast that summer. Anyway," says Gia. And just like that, she changes the subject. About Darren's 8th step, his moral imperative to make amends, his paralyzing guilt and shame, she has nothing to say. "You doing good?" she asks. "What do you do for fun in there?" Fun is discouraged. "I was really sorry to hear about your mom." The words cause him physical pain. "It was a beautiful service. They did a great job. Even my dad said so. The pain lodged in his throat like something that could choke him. She looked good. She was pretty banged up, but they covered everything. Darren swallows very deliberately, searching and fearless. They tried so hard to find you. Your dad even called me. He thought I'd know how to reach you. I tried your cell, but it wouldn't let me leave a message. The mailbox was full. Darren had been, at that time, unfindable. This was no accident. This was completely by design. They tried for days to find him. He learned some months later that his brother Rich had come to Baltimore to track him down. He was seen lurking around the old apartment in Charles Village, a big blonde guy who looked like a cop. Darren was by then locked out of his apartment. He heard the rumor from his neighbor who lived in the building and sold substandard weed, cheap quarter-ounce bags of seeds and stems. "They're watching you, man," said Gary, a conclusion Darren recognized as pot smoker paranoia, but did not dispute. It was in some way flattering that he was important enough to be watched by cops. It never occurred to him that his brother would come looking for him, or why. That spring, like every spring, his mother's daffodils would bloom before the snow melted. His family postponed her funeral as long as possible. Finally, the day before Christmas, they put his mother in the ground.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was wonderful. And I love that book. So we're going to jump right in with questions for you and for Josh. So either of you have the right to pass, or there'll be very general type of stuff. So that book came out in 2016 and won a ton of awards. Josh's book came out in 2017, won a ton of awards. Does that put more pressure on you to produce the next one?
I wish I were winning more awards, Tim. They were more like finalists. Yeah, I don't think, and I'm going to guess Jennifer would maybe say the same thing. I think with each book, you're just thinking about the story, and you're really not thinking about anything like any praise. You just want to tell the story honestly, and you want to tell a story that really interests you. So I really don't think, I guess there may be some writers out there who can count on that kind of award stuff. I'm not one of them, and it's not why I do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even remember writing the last book when I'm writing something new. I always feel like I've never done this before, and I have no clue what I'm doing. So it's like starting at zero every time, and it's almost like those other books were written by somebody else at a certain point.
Now, both of you have written short stories, novels, novellas. Do you get in a certain mindset for each form, or are you just writers writing?
I guess I'll go first, but I think each story, the story itself kind of informs you of how the length should be. And so it's almost like you feel when you start sitting down to write. I guess everyone writes in a different way. Some people know the end before they start. I don't. I think I found early on that otherwise that's overly controlling the work. And so I just start really writing what it is. The difference is, if it's a short story, then I definitely know that's what I'm doing, and the pacing is much faster. But something like a novella where it's in between, you might not know when you get started. And I think the difference is just, it's a pace thing. It's like a running thing, So if you're doing a novel, you have a lot more time to slow down and to not have it be all about plot or not as much about plot.
Yeah, they're very different things for me. I don't know. To me, it's like the difference between like a love affair and a long bad marriage. The novel is the long bad marriage, and it's even when it's a slog, it's like you wake up every day and you know what you're dealing with. In a short story, it's anything could happen to you. To me, they're even different on the sentence level. It's like the resolution is different in photographic terms. That with a novel, you just need a lot of pixels. And short story is more like, it's broad strokes, it's more like cartooning. And for me, a novel is like one of those giant, Ansel Adams photos that just looks like a big smudge if you don't have really fine resolution. You need lots and lots of pixels. So I'm even making the sentences differently from the very beginning if I know I'm writing a story. And I'm like Josh, I know which one it is. I've never turned a story into a novel or cut a novel down into a story. They're just like two inherently different things.
Well, someone messaged me a question for Jennifer. If you're starting at zero, what strategies or practices or routines do you use to get past that feeling?
I never get past that feeling. That feeling is with me to the very, very last day. No, strategies, I don't know. You know, I think writing a novel, it's like working at Home Depot. Like it's, you know, I tell this to my students all the time. You know, young writers have this idea that they need to be inspired to write. And if I believe that, I'd never write anything, you know? I think it's more like working at Home Depot, in that if you only go to work when you feel inspired to work at Home Depot, you're not gonna last very long. And I think a novel is like that. It's so much about just showing up and you know, banging your head against it for another day, whether you feel inspired or not. And I sort of find there's no correlation between feeling inspired and writing anything good. Like they're completely independent variables. So yeah, that feeling of not knowing what I'm doing, that stays with me to the very end, certainly to the end of the first draft. So like the first 2 years, you know, I'd feel like a fraud, and then I have a mess, but at least it's something to fix, and I feel kind of less fraudulent then.
I have a question from Ross. He says, both readings are about pretty dark material. Is it hard to write happier themes?
I don't think it's so much that. It's just that, you know, to keep ourselves interested and the reader interested, you know, the cliche is there has to be conflict. And you know, we're interested in problems. It's one of the reasons we do read fiction, to empathize with other people's problems. So, you know, happy things are great to round out the complexity of a character and the situation they're in. And I certainly don't want to be I don't think my work at all is relentlessly bleak. I think, in fact, especially in that collection of stories, Mexico, there's often, like at the end of that story that I was reading a little bit of, the kidnapping, you know, the protagonist finds a real way to, despite, say, having lost his finger, go forward in a way that much more significant than that, dealing with a kind of a former girlfriend that he had. And so to me, the happiness comes out of how the characters often reflect on their situation and how they get out of that. And that's the potential happiness, like finding some way to cope with your problem or get out of it.
Hi, Ross. I like that question a lot. You know, only Josh could find like redemption and dismemberment in these stories. I kind of love that. Sorry about my video. It's going to come and go. I think I'm back. Yeah, you know, there's happiness in all the books, but I just don't believe happiness and darkness come separately in life. I think they come in the same big mess, and you know, in life and in fiction. And so it's sort of artificial to separate those things. And I think my work has both of them kind of at every given moment. I know I'm flashing in and out, but I don't seem to be able to do anything about that. Anyway.
Well, you know, flash fiction is the rage these days. So based on what you guys just read, someone asked, I believe it's Linda, Josh, did you experience or did you observe a kidnapping attempt in Mexico, or was that fully fiction? And Jennifer, have you experienced, through people you're affiliated with or have worked with, a drug addict?
So, I mean, I want to say first, because I think it's really important, especially given the horror of the Trump years, that, you know, there are many wonderful things in Mexico and I mean, you know, culturally, food, a million ways, right? But there has been a lot of violence here. There have been 200,000 people have died in the drug war since 2006. 62,000 people have disappeared. So that's a lot of people. And as far as the kidnapping, my dentist here was kidnapped. He's gay. There's nothing really directly about that in this story. It kind of comes out of all sorts of things, but he was, they have something called secuestro express, like express kidnapping. And that's this thing that kind of happens in the story where people get kidnapped and then they're taken to the ATM day after day for these, say 5 days, as long as they can take money out. So, a lot of these stories that I was writing, they would come out of things, people I would meet, stories I would take in. And then of course there's a huge fictional element to them too.
So regarding the question about addiction, this book, Heat and Light, is actually a lot about addiction. And I don't know, growing up where I did in Northern Appalachia, it is something that has been happening in the culture, certainly for the last 20 years. And I think more particularly in the last 10 years, as economically that place has sort of, the wheels have kind of fallen off. So yeah, I mean, I know lots of people who are in addiction or in some other stage of it, post addiction, or that it is lifelong work for a lot of people. And I know a lot of people who have been doing that work and continue to do that work, and sometimes fall down, but do that work their whole lives. Yeah.
So what are the processes you both have for editing or filling out your first drafts? And do you guys have like readers of your work that are special to you in terms of getting feedback?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the length of the piece. So, that first draft, again, if it's something like a short story, it really does feel like a sprint, and it's coming out really quickly. And often I will write it with kind of, not wanting to edit it all as I go. And somewhat the same with a novel, but there the difference is that, there's so much reworking in a novel, I feel, because of the size. And so it feels like a different thing. I'm so grateful to, certain readers. And right now I'm kind of have the first draft of a memoir out. And I just had 3 readers read it. And I think that you really look to those people to be able to trust them. And, you want kind of better readers than you are. And so that it's incredible how much they can make you aware of your work.
First drafts are miserable for me. I have never had that feeling of having them come out easily or quickly. They're always something I eke away at very painfully. I think that revision is the only part of writing I actually enjoy. Like I wish somebody else could write the first draft and then I could just fix it for a few years. I do rely on readers. Probably my closest reader is somebody I went to the writer's workshop with at Iowa way back when, and it still is my first line reader. I mean, I don't write a grocery list without this guy looking at it. So he's the person I trust the most. He's just known my work from the very beginning, and kind of calls me on the things that I try to get away with. I've had various editors over the years. I have a new editor for this book that I just finished. And it's a slightly different process always with a new person. But I find that this kind of, lifelong reader I've had is so useful to me that whoever my nominal editor is, he's the person I rely on the most. I also have, other writer friends who look at things. Writer Joshua Ferris has been looking at the draft of this new book that I've just done and was really helpful. And so, I try out different people depending on the work. Different people are better readers for different kinds of material. But I have my one go-to person, and he's the only one who ever sees an early draft. I mean, my real editor would never get to see work at that early stage.
I do want to say that with the camera going out, people are not going to have any problems with name recognition. Like it's
Sorry about that. I don't know what's happening.
So we got a question about our current. Josh mentioned the previous administration. So the question is, can you guys talk a little about our current times shape the ideas about writing? And I guess to go a little bit further with that question, should writers go out of their way to be socially conscious?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I've never shied away from writing about things that are directly related to politics, because I don't see politics as somehow not part of our daily life. And I think that there has been a kind of tendency to view in the literary world this idea that something cannot be aesthetic if it's somehow political. And of course, if work becomes ideological or reductive, or isn't capturing the complexity of the characters, then we have a problem. But like in my novel Blind Speed, which came out in 2009, that novel dealt a lot with, there's a campaign that's in there. The protagonist's brother is running for political office in Boston and running for Congress. And I think a lot of what that whole novel was about, separate from the politics, but related, was just this whole idea of truth and lies, and how things, there's, for example, fake reenactments of the Battle of the Old North Bridge in Concord that kind of opens up the piece. And then there's a palm reading where there's a question of whether the palm reading is accurate or not. And that extends into politics, into the novel as well, the manipulation of one brother of his other brother's kind of work, and staging some eco-terrorist to take him to look tough on crime. So I think we should engage with politics if we're personally interested in it. I am, because I think it does have a lot to do with power dynamics and ethics. And I see that as the kind of, the moral questions that we're dealing with are very much related often with politics.
I'd agree with that. When I first started writing fiction, I thought very differently about this question, and it seemed possible to me then to write stories that did not engage with politics. And given what's happened in the world in the last few years, I no longer find that possible as a writer of fiction. Like, it's simply, I cannot separate my work from the world we live in. Like, it bleeds into everything I write. And certainly in the Trump era, that has been more true than ever for me. The novel I just finished writing, that will be out just about a year from now, is probably the most political thing I've ever written. And it is not a coincidence that it was written during the age of Trump. It's a part of myself that I can't shut off when I'm writing fiction, and don't really want to. So it's, in the times we live in now, I think every fiction writer I know has become more politically engaged. It's almost inevitable. You just can't not be.
And do you have certain readers, both of you, that will proof your work specifically for cultural appropriate or accurate content? That was a question for Julia.
I've never had someone directly do that. I think, for example, with my book that takes place in Mexico, where there are a lot of different voices, many of them are first person with kind of Americans living in Mexico, but there are also protagonists who are Mexican. And I've always had readers for that particular work and collection who were from Mexico, and the book was translated into Spanish in Mexico by Alfaguara, which is kind of like Knopf. So the editor that did the translation, certainly from Mexico, and that's something, of course, you always want to be sure that you're not in any way, it's not a question of stereotyping, it's just a question of not even capturing things accurately. And clearly this has been a big problem with a book like American Dirt. But I don't, for me, the ultimate test is, for example, in my case with the collection in Mexico, it's how were many people in Mexico reacting to the book? And the answer was they were reacting really well to the book. And actually, there were very few people. I think there's sometimes some very well-meaning folks in the US who, for example, they've had many good experiences in a place like Mexico, which I certainly have too. And therefore they want to think, okay, so let's pretend that there's no violence going on there. And, those things are not incompatible. Like, we can acknowledge what's happening and still be both very respectful of the country and of the people living there.
It's a really interesting question, and it's coming up a lot in the last few years, this question of cultural sensitivity and appropriation. I think have never used those terms to myself, but it's more just I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about. So, I wrote a book about a priest, so I let a priest read it. And, I wrote a book with coal miners in it, so I gave it to a coal miner. And so I guess I don't make a distinction between, people's ethnic background or religious background or economic background or what region of the world you're from. Regardless, you do have to get it right if you're trying to write realistic fiction. So whatever world you're writing about, you do need to run it past people who know that world better than you do. And I think that applies regardless of the subject matter or the particular demographics of the characters you're writing. It's not simply a demographic question. It's that you have to make sure the world you're rendering is true. So it's good to have readers who vet it for truth.
All right. So Jennifer mentioned what she's working on very briefly. Josh, what do you have coming up and what are you working on?
Well, the manuscript that I'm trying to get published now is a novel that takes place in New York City, and it really deals a lot with global warming and with death. And there are kind of four different, main characters who are confronting very immediate issues. One who has these kind of secrets about how rapidly global warming has taken place, and he's deciding whether to pass on these secrets. And then someone else whose husband's in a coma and she's trying to decide whether she needs to kind of unplug the machine or not. And a third person who's being kind of approached in a Me Too type moment by someone who's a scientist who feels he's going to live forever. And then a kind of a fourth person who he's retiring, and his daughter who had OD'd on some LSD that he had made when he was much younger, the father, and he feels this kind of guilt and needs to take care of her as she's an adult and a single parent mom. So, and all of this comes together in a kind of mass shooting in Washington Square. So, I mean, it's really about grief and dealing with that. That's the one that's done. And then otherwise I'm just, completing this memoir now or working on it. And it'll probably be another year or so on that.
Well, it sounds wonderful. So can't wait for that one to come out. So I'm going to wrap up since I've gone over time once again. The most important question of all for you guys, what's your favorite indie bookstore that people can go and purchase your books online? Because, they probably with the pandemic use a little bit of cash flow.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to say in Boston, Harvard Bookstore. So, in Cambridge.
All right.
I am devoted to my local Brookline Booksmith.
Well, fantastic. And I am very grateful to have you guys here and very thankful for your readings and really appreciate it, Josh and Jennifer. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And for you folks that are watching on Facebook live stream, I'm going to shut you down right now and turn you off. If in the future you ever want to be involved in the question and answer, use the Zoom link, and you can also be involved in the open mic. So thanks very much for tuning in there.